So the next step now is to make the legs. You can see that I've cut all 4 of them, and I've got a leg taper cutting jig that I'm going to use, and I'll show you how to set that up. One of the things that's important to do is to mark exactly where you're going to cut these boards for tapering. I'm tapering on 2 sides of each leg, and to keep them oriented properly, I put a carpenter's mark on this side, just because if you don't do that, I don't know how you can keep track of the orientation. I'll show you the calculations here. This is the leg leveler, this little device here. It's got a T-nut and then a soft bottom, and that has a nut on it. I put a 1/4-inch nut on there to lock it in place. That's just the calculations, and that's how you install these little babies. You just drill a hole in the leg, tap the T-nut in, and drill a hole to the appropriate depth, and then screw it in. So to make the cut of a leg after one's marked, I take this jig, and I've already got it set up with respect to distances. I'm going to cut this piece off here, and you can see I brought that against the stops. Then it's a matter of tightening this down. This piece all the way through moves back and forth and is locked in place with this nut, and the same thing on the other end, so you can get any kind of a taper that you want. And then once that is set up, you just lock that leg down, and then I'll just run it through the saw. So it's pretty straightforward. All you're doing is cutting on a different plane. That's got a nice groove in the bottom to fit the table saw miter slot, and that will just cut the leg. You can see that the blade has been set up properly, and I'll just go ahead and do that now. So you can see here, this is one side of the leg cut off. That's just the piece that remains, and I'll just do the other one offline, and you can see that. I'm doing these offline because the noise of the suction from both the dust collector and the table saw just make a lot of noise. So, okay, so I've cut that first leg on 2 sides, and you can see I've put it together with the other ones, and you can see how it's cut. I've just clamped it down on the other end so it lifts it up. So this one is cut on this side and this side here, and I'll do that with all the others. And you can see this is the front of the looking at the desk from the front of the desk, so you can see how the legs taper and sway. They're pointed out and forward and back. So I'll finish the rest of them offline, and you can see that result. Okay, so here are the 4 legs, and you can see, looking from the front and from the bottom up, you can see how they're all splayed out. So that's the result we were looking for, and we got it. Thanks. You can see this process throws a lot of dust all over the place. I mean, my goodness. There's no way that I can figure out to use my dust collection system for this job, but I wish I could. But anyway, the 4 legs are cut. I'll show you how they look in a minute. Okay, so now I'm installing the levelers. I just used a simple method to find the center of each of these. Just draw a line from corner to corner. The intersection is the center. And then I'll drill a 5/16 hole, sink that T-nut in, and that'll be it. I'll show you the results when it's done. Okay, so now I've drilled the holes. I've used a brad point bit. You can see that here. That just holds the center much better. The bit doesn't wander around. I've drilled it 1 inch deep as the instructions call out. Now we'll just take this little T-nut, whoops, dropped it down, get another one. Get another one out here in a minute. I'll fetch it out of the wastebasket in a little while. This packet comes with a whole series of these. They're just very handy little T-nuts, you can see like here, and they've just got a screw for a 1/4 inch 1/4 by 20 thread, so you just stick them on top like that, Hold it, I'll put it on the one you can see. And just like that, and then you just tap the thing down in. You don't have to worry about them splitting the wood at all. They're just little T-nuts that bang in. And then if I drilled the hole to the right depth, that little lever goes in like that. And what I do normally is put this nut, I don't think I showed you that, but this is a way to lock it in place. Just take a little nut for a nut on here for the end, then you can lock that in place when you screw it down and it won't wander all over the place. I'll just do that on all the legs, and no need to show that in the video because this is the whole process. Just take a little wrench and lock it in place. That's it. You can see the tabletop is already cut. It's not finished yet. It's sanded down, everything like that. One of the things that I love about this is black walnut is the grain and the grain patterns. And there's marvelous stuff you can see over in here. There's some knots in here. There's a lot of different grain. I tried to match it as best I could with the wood I had available to make it, you know, look like it flowed together. Right in here was a little problem. Now the problem is fixed now, but that was a hole and it went all the way through. And you probably will run into things like that. And I've developed a little method of fixing that. I just take a bunch of tape like this, put it around the outside, make it as close as I can to the edge because I'm going to epoxy that hole in. And that's all I do. It's really very simple process. So once it's like that, then it's ready to fill in. You don't have to then clean up all the epoxy that's all over the place. So what do I use for epoxy? You can see I've used this a few times, I would say. Yeah, okay. So it's quick setting epoxy, and it's just 1-to-1. And you mix it together and mix it on a piece of this plastic. And the reason you use plastic is you don't want to make a mess, and you just mix it in a small area with, you know, a small little device like this, and then put it in place. And I use, well, just a flat spatula to press it down in. Since it went all the way through on the other side, I put plastic on the other side. Let me show you that because it's of interest when you get a hole that goes all the way through. You want to prevent that from going down into whatever you got. So I put plastic like this. You can always pull that off. It works with glue as well as with epoxy. And then you press something up against it, set it down, then you can force the epoxy down into that joint. You let the epoxy dry proud, and then after you take all the tape off, you can see that you got ridges all the way around like this. And so you're just taking the back end of a chisel and you just chisel it off like that. And then I sand it down with 80 and then 220, and if I have to go to 400 to make it nice and smooth like it is. So that's the process there. Any questions on this, I'd be happy to answer. Okay, so now we had to cut. I mentioned the bit that we used to cut that, but now how are we going to do that? Well, there's really two ways. One is to try to hold this big piece up on my router table. Obviously that's too big, so what I thought of doing is using this device, which is nothing more than a roller. And you set it up at the height of the table, and then you put it on the router table like that, and then you run it back and forth. But that wasn't going to work well. I could see where I would have problems with that. Why was I trying to avoid just using the router by itself on top of the table? Well, I'll tell you. If you've ever used a router, you know that one of the things it does real well is make all kinds of dust. It just, if you don't have, this has dust collection all the way around. And so if you use just the router by itself, it's going to throw dust all over the place. And so I didn't want to do that. But that's what I ended up doing, and it took me a while to clean up. But anyway, those are two methods that you could use.